In the last video, we finished setting up all of our state and hooking everything up. So if we click on checkboxes, they work, we can add new items, we can remove them, and we can reset preferences. This is all really great, but there is a big problem. This actually is pretty slow. Even with such a simple application, if we add a bunch of these and we start clicking around, it might be hard to tell on the video, but it's actually pretty sluggish, and you can kind of tell there's these delays that really don't need to be there. And the reason for that is we are re-rendering every single thing every single time anything changes. And we can actually see these durations of all these cards in a single click are taking up to like 20 milliseconds each. We can get a better view by going to the React profiler, and you can find this by installing the React dev tools. So if you just look that up and you go to the Chrome ones or whatever browser you're on, you can get those React dev tools, and you'll get the components and you'll get the profiler. So basically what we can do now is we can start profiling, and if we click around, we can stop, and we can see there's these really big peaks that are taking like 200 milliseconds, and everything is re-rendering. It's really helpful because it also tells us that it's specifically the QR codes that seem to really be causing some problems. We can switch to this rank chart, and absolutely it is these QR codes are just like towering everything. And the reason is because QR codes are kind of hard to build. That's why I put them in there. They're not actually helpful, and they don't link to anything. They just kind of show us what could happen. The absolute easiest way to fix a problem like this is just to start memoizing things. So what memoizing is basically if you have a function that takes in, or a component that takes in some arguments and outputs something, and it's always the same thing. There's no side effects. So for the same exact input, you'll always get the exact same outputs. No side effects. It doesn't change anything outside of it. Then what you can do is you can say, all right, computer, keep track of what the output was for these inputs, and whenever you get those inputs back, just return the exact same output. And so React does a similar thing, or allows us to do a similar thing, by memoizing the last result. So what we can do is we can take this QR code, we'll just copy it here, and then we'll create a function. We'll call it memoized QR code, and we'll call react.memo. So you can wrap this around your components. So I'm going to actually call it as a function, memoized QR code. There it goes for me. And just return what we previously had. Now we need to pass in the value right here. And up here, we'll change this. And we'll delete all this because we don't need it. It's already baked in. We could pass more parameters if we needed, but right now we're really just using the ID as the value. So basically this is saying, hey, if the value does not change, just return the exact same QR code every single time, which is really great. So let's pull that profiler back up. Let's start recording. Let's click around. We'll even reverse and stop. All right, so what we see now is that this QR code, it says it's memoized. This is really nice. It actually tells us this was wrapped in React Memo. We can keep going through all of these, and while everything else changes, there we even saw it switch around. While everything else changes, the QR code does not have to render, and that really saves us a lot of time. So even though there are these big spikes, we're now at 14 milliseconds. I mean, we just shaved off like, almost the entire interaction. It's like we divided it by 10 basically, way faster. But let's assume that, or not assume, but let's pretend that things are still slow and we need to make them even a little bit faster. So something else we can do is we can memoize this card. So the way we'll do that is, let's get rid of this. We'll say const card equals react.memo. And you really want to do this function card thing when you're doing React Memo, because otherwise the profiler will not know the name of these. And if you ever got any like stack traces or anything, any errors, you wouldn't have the name. So you really want to do this react.memo and then put this function card inside of it and give it this name and everything. This is the pattern I've found to be the most helpful. And then of course we need to export default card. So now it's saying, all right, if the ID changes, title changes, body changes, options, or toggle choice changes, then re-render. And if none of those changes, we'll use the same one. So let's see if this went ahead and worked. We're gonna click this. And just that one simple test, we really should only be seeing one of these changing, but unfortunately we're still seeing in that middle one, everything changed, even though these are both memoized. And the reason is it'll actually tell us, hey, the props changed, toggle choice changed. Why is that though? It really shouldn't be changing, you would think. But if you go into app and you look at toggle choice, this is just an inline function. So this inline function is actually getting recreated every single time app re-renders, and app is re-rendering because the entire state changed. When we click that, if you remember, we have this in a reducer, we're resetting the entire state. So the entire state changed, which caused this to get re-rendered because we're inlining it, and we're passing that down, and it's just a mess. So how can we solve this? Well, we could refactor this to a class and make this, a method, but that's kind of messy and definitely not my preferred way to do it. But React actually, provides another hook called use callback. So use callback, you can wrap any function inside of it, and you'll actually pass a array to it. So what this is this is another memoization technique, and it's memoizing a function. And so it's saying if anything in here changes, I'm going to recreate this function, but otherwise I'm going to use the previous version. And you can tell this is actually empty because we're not relying on anything else. All the parameters are coming from when we actually call it. If we were relying on something else, like for instance, I don't know, for some reason, let's break this apart and say that we're just going to console log state every time that this changes. The ESLint error will actually tell us, hey, React hook used callback has a missing dependency. State either include it or remove the dependency array. So that's a really nice, helpful kind of little message there to tell us, hey, you messed up. So let's delete that back. Let's get everything back to how it was, and we will wrap that in use callback. And let's actually do that to all of these. So we're going to do all of these with a parentheses, get to the end of the line, and we're good. Oh, again, my bad. We have to add. Oh no, sorry. I can, there we go. We just need to add this dependency array to all of these. So these are all good. Move these out here. There we go. All right, great. So we got that right. So it has to wrap around the entire function, and it has to have a dependency array at the end. So we've now memoized all those, and so if anything is memoized, it will not re-render. So let's make sure that that's working. Give this a nice refresh. We will start profiling. We'll click it, stop, and see what happens. Great, our entire second card was memoized. This is exactly what we want. Things are way faster now. If I pull this out a little bit, we can see that this only took 8 milliseconds. It was taking about 14, so we shaved off a little bit. In this case, that's a really small amount. In the actual production version, it's really not going to make a huge difference. But you can imagine if these really were complicated, had a lot more stuff going on, and if you had a lot more items, this is going to be really helpful because as it scales, every single render is really going to add up. So memoizing, that's like the easiest way to handle this stuff. Again, we can go into controls and we can actually do the exact same thing. So let's do const controls equals react.memo. And down here, we're going to memo and then export default. I saved it. Controls. And then we're good to go. So these will not actually get recreated every time we click something. They're all now independent, which is really nice. Now, I will say that even though this was pretty easy to implement, React Memo, I would definitely not recommend as the first thing to always reach for unless it was something like that QR code where it's like, hey, this is a pretty isolated thing and we know it's really hogging a lot of that render time. Because the issue you get into is exactly what we saw. You get these things like these inline functions, and maybe you have arrays that are being recreated every single time, or objects, just all sorts of things in JavaScript that when you do a strict equality, when you do like that triple equal, it's not going to know that, hey, this is the same thing, even though it really should be the same thing. So you have to use callback a lot. There's another hook called use memo. You just have to start wrapping all these things, and basically you end up trying to memoize your whole application, and it might not even be giving you much gains. So definitely, it's a good tool to know, and it may be a good place to start, but there are, as we're about to see, there's a lot of other solutions that you can take when you want to optimize your React applications.